Hello, my science lovers. So today, this is going to be an epic talk. We are going to talk about the latest abortion ban. We got Dr. Torres, OBGYN. We got Nate Brody, law professor. We got Dragnot, who for some reason keeps coming back to my show. But anyway, he's awesome. Undergrad in science. We got Divine Disbelief, who also works in Planned Parenthood, along with Atheist Husker. So we're going to be live here in just a bit. So I'm going to take a moment to thank my patrons. All right, we are live. Yay! I'm so excited about this particular episode of This Week in BS, or This Week in Bad Science. So, let me introduce our panel. I'm going to just go around. So, first I got Dr. Torres up here. Tell us who you are, what you do, what you love, and what you know.
Oh, wow, that's such a long list. So, I'm Dr. Leah Torres. I'm an OBGYN practicing in the West. I am a political advocate for reproductive health care, and I'm fellowship trained in contraception and abortion care. I love making people laugh at how ridiculous our world is right now. I enjoy science and evidence, and that's how I practice. And when I'm not working, I'm usually sleeping or walking my dog.
All right. Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. I know you're on call, so Dr. Torres is going to hop in and out from time to time, and that's completely fine. We're just really super stoked to have her on the show. All right, Dragnot. I'm so excited. So, Dragnot, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who you are, all that. You know the spiel. You've been here before.
I may have been here a few times. People may have seen me around, maybe shirtless, maybe not shirtless.
It's hot where you live, so I understand.
Texas is hot, and then I am kind of a fat guy, so I definitely generate a bit of heat. But with that being said, while I'm also not being shirtless, I have a YouTube channel where I talk about nonsense. Occasionally, you may catch me talking about something I'm passionate about, which is, as Mel mentioned, science. In about less than a year, I'll have my second degree, my bachelor's degree in biology with a specialization in molecular, cellular, and biotechnology. And so I'm going to kind of weigh in a bit on this very contentious topic, which seems to almost be reversing the hands of time, but I want to try and give it a fair shake, and hopefully folks can kind of learn from this. But we have Dr. Torres here, which hopefully she can dispel a lot of misconceptions, even for me, because at no point in time or any of us trying to proclaim to have a position that's infallible. It's always nice to kind of be open to learning new things.
All right. Well, glad you're here again, Drag. All right, Nate. Nate, how are you? Are you there? He pops in and out too. I don't know.
No, I'm here. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I was just
it's okay.
getting very mad outside.
It's okay. So, Nate, tell us a bit about yourself. I know you are a law professor, right?
Yes, I've been teaching at a law school for about 2 years now. I love it. It's very, very good work. I'm also a practicing attorney up here in the great state of New York. My YouTube channel just really focuses on legal issues. Me and my friend Steve McCrae's never-ending argument on the definition of atheism, and watching G-Man and Drag just go through their thing. So that's like my YouTube life right now. So if you want to watch me do that stuff, hit the subscribe button, and I'm here to talk. So hopefully it's going to be fun. It's a sad topic, but I think it's going to be fun.
I'm excited to hear what the legalities are and what the implications legally are for that. Not only talk about, the procedure and everything, but also what this means. All right, Atheist Husker, I know your partner will be in soon. She worked at Planned Parenthood. Tell us a little bit about you, though, until she hops over on here and adds in with her experience.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, Mel, first off, thanks again for putting this out there, and also for having both myself and my partner on here. It does mean a lot to us. I was the assistant state director here in Texas for American Atheists, and specifically focused on reproductive justice and the need for fact-based sex education in all Texas public schools. And we still focus on that. And that is one of the ways that we can ensure knowledge for reproduction, and especially with teenage pregnancy rates and things like that, which is where here in the Lone Star State we're fairly high in that area, is by providing the education. And also it will ensure that we see better maternal mortality rates, as well as fewer abortions, because of the availability for contraceptives. And those are the things that Susan and I talk about really almost every single day. So that's what we do, and we do that on our podcast as well, Divine Disbelief.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. This is your first time on my show, so that's really, really cool. All right. So since Dr. Torres is available at the moment, I thought we could let her have a little bit of the floor and talk a bit about the concerns she has, particularly for this what seems to be a multi-state abortion ban. What are your thoughts about that, Dr. Torres? I think you're muted. And there goes. There you go. I'm going to mute my end, so,
Fair. Yeah, and as mentioned, I think we are rolling back the hands of time. It's frightening anytime, and forgive me, but I would never presume to walk into a courtroom and start practicing law. And for politicians to presume that they can walk into a clinic and start practicing medicine is disconcerting, to say the very least. These laws that ban medically sound, evidence-based medical procedures will only do harm. When you make a medical procedure scarce, unavailable for whatever way you do that, whether it's because of insurance premiums or out-of-pocket costs, when you make procedures unavailable to people are harmed and people can die. This is not hyperbole. This is just scientific fact, and what we've seen in history is when you make abortion inaccessible, whether because it's illegal or because it's too expensive, people are harmed. They will find a way to have an abortion. It's not that they won't need one. They'll just find another way to have one. And so what you want to do is make sure that medical procedures are safe and accessible.
I've read a lot with I believe it's pronounced Guttmacher Institute. They do a lot with the reproductive rights, especially when they get into a lot of the legal jargon. And I found their website to be quite easy to read, particularly for lay people who don't quite understand that sort of thing. They had mentioned that the CDC had done research in 1976 to show that one of the things that they concluded was that abortion services needed to be improved and available more widely, especially for women at high risk for seeking illegal abortions, because what they said was any actions which impede their access to legal abortion may increase their risk of death. And so a lot of the demographics that they found were for the ones that had the illegal or the self-induced abortions had been within their own community. They tend to be black women, and it was more than 12 weeks pregnant at that point. And so with this particular heartbeat bill, which is earlier than 6 weeks, what are your thoughts about that? Because a lot of women, from what I've seen, a lot of women don't even know that they're pregnant till they're up to missing that first period, which can be as many as 6 or more, up to 8 weeks from what I've seen, at least from my understanding.
Right. Well, let's talk first about how it's a complete violation of self-determination.
Okay.
6 weeks, 2 weeks, 5 days, it doesn't matter how pregnant you are. If you're pregnant and you don't want to undergo the risks that are inherently involved in being pregnant and giving birth, you shouldn't have to undergo those risks. There are risks with everything we do, and in no other area are we told what risks we must undergo. We don't force people to donate their organs. We don't force people to donate blood or receive blood, for that matter. A Jehovah's Witness can refuse a blood transfusion knowing that they may die, and that's their right. We cannot force people to remain pregnant against their will. I don't care how many weeks, how many days. It is unethical, immoral, and a violation of every human right that we have ever established on this planet anywhere. That said, it is dangerous to make something that is safe, scientifically sound, supported by health organizations, the World Health Organization, the American Medical Association, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, all support evidence-based safe abortion care. It should be made available. These laws endanger people's lives, real lives. And when they start making laws about someone who's 6 weeks pregnant and they're not worrying about the 1 in 4 children who don't know where their next meal is coming from, that just puts a pit in my stomach. I can't even understand how a state who has, I don't know how many children in foster care, 1 in 4 are food scarce, they don't know when their next meal is coming. It's insanity. They need to be using their time and money to help people, not hurt them.
It's interesting because there's other laws that are trying, and I know it's already in many states, a convicted convict or a felon is not allowed to vote. So if you make abortion illegal to the point to where they will serve time for having done such a thing, that also removes a woman's right to vote, which I find the parallels there pretty interesting. Is this really about, saving a baby that's not wanted, or is putting, because pregnancy changes your body. It permanently changes a woman's body. I mean, it really does. I mean, I went to nursing school for a bit. I'm not a medical doctor, but that was one of the things they told us. One of the most traumatic things you can do to your body as a woman is have a baby. Because you go through such a massive amount of change. And it's just, I just find it interesting that, a lot of parallels here. They're not really discussing, anything on aftercare after you have the baby. If you're going to have this forced birth, what are you going to do to support this child? So I completely agree with what you're saying here. If they're going to sit here and force women to have babies, what are they going to do with the child afterwards? Going to go in foster care? I mean, the foster care system is pretty freaking huge as it is. I mean, it's just...
Well, and that's another point, is that they try to say that, well, that's okay if you don't want a parent because you can place the baby for adoption. And if you've ever thought about what adoption is, and I myself am adopted, so I get this whole thing. And people have different adoptee, adopter experiences. Everybody's story is different. Mine is my own. But if you are going to tell someone to go through a pregnancy for 9 to 10 months, give birth, and then no big deal, hand the baby off to strangers, not a big deal, right? Like
That's not traumatic
played,
at all.
Right. It's played off like it's not a big deal, like it's not traumatic for everyone involved. And by the by, to treat pregnancy, as you said, it does change your body forever, and that is scientific fact. To treat pregnancy like it's just something we do is highly offensive.
It used to be lethal, back in the day, before medical science.
Plenty of people have died in childbirth and pregnancy, right? I mean,
yeah.
And today, fortunately, those numbers are fewer, but they're not zero.
No.
Absolutely not zero. Women of color are more adverse, having more adverse effects of prenatal care and childbirth. They have a higher maternal mortality rate. That gets into systemic issues of racism and poverty. We should be ashamed of ourselves in this country and our healthcare system.
There's still portions of the U.S. that have an infant mortality rate that rivals that of third world countries, and I don't think a lot of people understand that, and that's due to lack of prenatal care. So if you're going to completely eliminate the option of abortion for women who cannot afford to actually have the child, let alone get the proper care to ensure their own personal safety to go through this process. I mean, this is it's frightening. It's absolutely frightening.
And not to mention that pregnancy is also a risk factor for intimate partner violence. So now you're telling people they have to stay pregnant and possibly continue to be abused by their partner, possibly killed. If you look at the rates of homicide, they increase during pregnancy. I don't understand any side of this that actually is looking to protect maternal mortality and promote planned pregnancies, wanted pregnancies, safe pregnancies. Those are the healthiest. When you plan to get pregnant and then therefore, you are planning on parenting or planning on placing the baby for adoption, when you plan that, your pregnancy is healthier. You have a safer pregnancy. The risks aren't zero. They're never zero.
Right.
But that is what we should be promoting.
Right.
We shouldn't be withholding access to healthcare. And yes, abortion is healthcare. That is, again, a scientific fact. Pregnancy alters your physiology, puts you at risk. Abortion terminates those risks.
No, I agree with you in there. I was looking in some of the things, particularly with the Guttmacher website. They had discussed that there's been studies that have come out that there's no higher risk of mental trauma of having an abortion than carrying it to term. So there's no increased risk there. There's no link between abortion and breast cancer across the board. The World Health Organization, the UK and the US have studied this at length. There's no link between the two. So there's a lot of these different myths. What do you think is the strongest myth? And I'm going to open the panel up to ask you questions if that's okay. What do you think is like the worst myth that you see that is possibly the most believable and the most dangerous when it comes to the ideas that surround abortion? And if there's several, feel free to throw those out there.
Well, let's start. I think the myths all contribute to one very dangerous factor, and that is the stigmatization of abortion. The myth that abortion is murder makes the pregnant person a murderer, makes me a murderer, makes us targets for violence. So the stigmatization of this medical procedure is the most dangerous and most egregious, I believe. And when those terms are thrown out there as if they're true, well, let's take it for a second. Let's say, for argument's sake, abortion is murder. If abortion is homicide, let's use a legal term, and I'm not a lawyer, right? We've got some legal experts here that can help. But if abortion is homicide, then miscarriage by default is involuntary manslaughter. And you cannot call one thing and not recognize the other as the other thing. But nobody wants to talk about how miscarriage is involuntary manslaughter. That's horrible. Yeah. Right? Wow. So you can't have it both ways. So I think that the stigmatization of this medical procedure, of even what it means to not want children, to be a woman and say, I don't want to be pregnant ever, is horrible in our culture. It's looked down upon, it's frowned upon, there's something wrong with you. So there's a lot of stigma surrounding reproductive health choices not only abortion, but others as well.
Somebody had mentioned that the reducing the access to contraception is a thing that's going on in, I believe, Ohio, HB 182. So it limits access to contraceptive coverage. BMZil Bob had popped up with that. And if the chat has any questions, let me know and just tag me, and then I will forward those on. All right, so the panel. Do any of you guys on the panel have any questions for Dr. Torres while she's here? Because I know you are very busy, and I appreciate your time. So, anybody?
I appreciate you doing this so much. It's very important.
I'm all for pro-choice. It's our bodies. If you don't like abortion, don't have one. That's it. It's that simple. It's absolutely okay. Divine Disbelief, do you have any questions for Dr. Torres? I know you are into science as far as sex education. So do you have any particular question?
Actually, yeah, a real big one, and one that we've been speaking about a lot recently, has to do with, you mentioned the maternal mortality rates in Georgia is the highest in the country, and Alabama is one of the highest in the countries. And as was mentioned, it disproportionately affects women of color, and they also either don't require any kind of sex education, or, as was mentioned, they limit access to contraceptives. What do you think the best way is, in your opinion, for getting that information out there? That this not just saying this will lead to, abortions happening without proper care, but actually forcing people to give birth is going to lead to even more maternal mortality and higher infant mortality rates in a state that is already, as was mentioned, at an incredibly high rate.
So if I'm understanding, how do we address that, or what's the best way to sort of curb the detrimental effects? Am I understanding your question?
Well, I think, because I don't think that's getting any kind of attention at all. The attention is going to the fact, well, and the things that we hear, like the snippets and things like this, but the fact that this will lead to more maternal and infant mortality rates, or like the rises in those mortality rates. What do you think the best way is for us to kind of steer that conversation to say this is true as well, and we should focus on that too?
Well, I think it has to come from the people of those states, and I know that there are grassroots efforts in those states to make aware the damage that these laws are going to do. It really is going to have to come from Georgians and Alabamans, and the resources are out there, but I really think that has to be floods of phone calls to legislators' offices. I mean, they may not listen, but news stories, publishing in the local newspapers, that's important. Getting the education out there, super important. I mean, I can yell from the rooftops over here, but I'm not a Georgian, I'm not an Alabamian. And so I think making aware the power of one's voice and how important it is to gather, just, how we did the other day on Tuesday, I think it was, there were marches all over the country saying essentially we want to live, stop killing us. I think that those one-on-one stories with legislators, calling them and saying, listen, here's my story. I need you to not pass this law because I don't want to be harmed. I don't want my sister to be harmed. I don't want my daughter to be harmed. Legislators need to hear from their constituents.
Not just email. Email's great, but if you're calling them ad nauseum, that's going to come through a bit better than just an email, in my opinion.
Agreed. And I wish, I would encourage people, gather, make a meeting, make a group meeting, get people there, get people in those offices. And it's hard, and people can't, travel. And I get that. So whatever you can do, if you have to call, if you have to email, calling is going to be better. Like, that is the only way. I'm afraid that is the only way to get our voices heard, because honestly, I have sat across the table from these legislators in the conversation about healthcare, where they are the attorney and I am their constituent who is also a medical expert. And I've had them look me in the eye and say, that's nice. we're still going to pass this law, even though it's anti-science and anti-everything you just told me. It's dire. Like, it's dire. And we need people moving. We need people to rise up and say, look, this is not okay.
Mm-hmm. It's frightening to me that we're having this conversation, especially when you look at the data of how deaths from abortion have drastically dropped, and even the trend, the amount of abortion has dropped in general, all from 2014. Now, partly that might be because of the closing of certain clinics, or not, but it was around, I think it was 29 women out of 1,000 around 1980 or so, and it's now around 14 to 16 out of 1,000. It's not so high so much as people thought before, because we have education. In my opinion, and this is my opinion, we have education, we have the internet now, which is a wonderful resource. We have access to contraception, we have access to all of these things, and now we are at a point where it's being taken away, and the threat is there. So let me see. Nate, do you have any questions for Dr. Torres? I know you are on the legal side of things, and we're going to have you weigh in here in a second about what this law means and legally. So do you have any questions for Dr. Torres?
No, I just think, I think for all these years, for the past 40 or 50 years that abortion has been legal, it seems to me that the fundamental thing we're talking about, a woman's right to choose whether or not to end her pregnancy, and that right is now under attack in these states. And it's a shame, because I think, because I really do think that those people in Alabama, the majority of people in Alabama who want this thing, they believed as strongly that they're doing the right thing as I think the people who are pro-choice do. So how do you change their minds? Because obviously just going and screaming at them or telling them these facts aren't going to change their mind. Do you just forget about the older generation and just really want to talk about to the younger kids, so those people, or how do you change the conversation? Because right now, whatever we're doing now is not working, because they're saying everything you're telling us. We know they know Ben Shapiro. They know everything you're saying. You know what they're saying? They're saying we don't agree with you. It's murder. And that's the reason why we need to pass these laws.
Mm-hmm. I think you make a very important point and bring up a very important question. So thank you for that. And I also want to thank all you guys, and I mean that literally, all you men's in the, oh my gosh, I'm getting called right now.
It's okay.
Hold on, Nate, I'm going to answer your question, but I'll be right back, okay?
Okay. Well, Nate, while she's handling the phone call, why don't you talk a little bit about the abortion ban law and what the implications are in regard to that?
All right. Just so everyone knows, in 1973, the Supreme Court didn't pass. They ruled in a case called Roe versus Wade. And that case stood for the proposition. In that case, the Supreme Court read in a new constitutional right to the Constitution. They were saying a woman's right to choose whether to terminate her pregnancy is protected by the Constitution. That right is found in the Constitution, protected. Now, people sometimes are surprised to see, like, what do you mean they created a new constitutional right? But they do that all the time. Like the right there's rights that we have. The right to privacy, for instance, is not in the Constitution, but the Supreme Court has read it in a certain way to interpret it to exercise other rights. You need the right to privacy, and this right is one that the Supreme Court in 1973 is constitutionally protected. In 1993, the Supreme Court visited that ruling again, whether it was a woman had a constitutional right whether or not to enter a pregnancy. And then at that particular point in time, in 1993, the Supreme Court set forth the standard by which any law that's passed by one of these legislatures are going to be evaluated in determining whether it's constitutional or unconstitutional. And that's the standard called the undue burden. So if there is an undue burden, if the state law or regulation that's passed is an undue burden for a woman to be able to exercise that constitutional right to get an abortion, then that undue burden, then that law is unconstitutional. And an example of that, in the case of Casey was I think Pennsylvania passed a law in which a husband had to notify his wife before she was able to receive an abortion, and the court said that's an undue burden. That's a substantial obstacle in the way of a woman to actually get an abortion. And then but the court found there were some regulations that weren't undue burden. Some of those regulations were like a 24-hour waiting period. Right. Another one was the fact if you're a minor, you had to get your parental consent. That they said that wasn't an undue burden, or you can get judicial consent. And I forget what the last one was. It was something like reporting requirements of how many abortions you actually had and when they and when they were happening. So they said those were not undue burdens, but forcing a wife or a girlfriend to tell the baby's father that she's having an abortion before she gets one was an undue burden. So what these laws essentially do, the laws in Georgia and the laws in Alabama, they essentially do the same thing. The court in Casey, in the case that set forth the undue burden, said your constitutional right is strongest pre-viability. That's usually about 24 weeks into a pregnancy. So they said anything before that period, then it is a woman's constitutional right to be able to terminate that pregnancy. And the state cannot ban it. But anytime after that, anytime after the fetus is determined to be viable, then the state can step in and say, no, you can't have an abortion because that thing is alive. That thing has rights and making this endowed rights. So most of these states like Alabama banned abortions after viability, but they weren't constitutionally permitted to ban abortions pre-viability up to about 24 weeks. So now both these laws are doing the same thing, just in different ways. The Georgia law bans abortions anything after 6 weeks, which is in that realm of viability. So that law is unconstitutional because of that. It causes an undue burden for a woman to exercise their constitutional right to a pre-viable fetus. The Georgia law even goes farther than that. It just says you can't have any abortion except for the life and health of the mother. And in that particular instance, that law attacks the fundamental calling of Roe, that a woman's constitutional right to determine whether she wants to end her pregnancy is a constitutional right. So they both attack it in different ways, but that is what the Alabama law says. It says a woman's right to choose is not one protected by the Constitution. Now, if let's say if this court was to overturn Roe and say, okay, women do not have that constitutional right to make that choice, then what happens is each individual state gets the right to make that choice. So if you live in New York or California, you have no problems. If you live in a state where probably abortion is already legalized by state law, you probably will not have a problem. But if you live in some place like Alabama, they're going to say, well, yes, we want to direct our laws, so we're going to make this illegal in our state. And that's the tension now that we have. That side is saying, we want right to self-determination. 90% of the people here don't want this procedure. Why force it upon us? And the other side is, and the individual is saying, the Constitution protects my right to make this choice. And since it does, you can't pass that law. I feel like I ranted it out, but that's the end.
No, that makes sense. So you're basically saying that, first of all, these laws, technically speaking, are not constitutionally supported in any way or fashion.
No, right on their face, they are not constitutional. Both of them.
Both of them. They're not constitutional. But it gets a little bit hairy about where a state decides viability is.
Yes, because now with the heartbeat bill, they're trying to make two arguments. The first argument is that they're saying, well, life starts at conception, but they're also making this argument about viability. Well, it's not really 24 weeks because medical science can keep a fetus alive when the heartbeat starts going. So we're going to kind of place it at the heartbeat level because they're trying to make that argument that even though viability is really 24 weeks, because medicine has progressed, we really can put it at 6 weeks now. Where Alabama just saying, listen, why play the games? We're going to ban it and attack Roe directly.
Okay. Well, let me get Dr. Torres in on this. So since we have a medical science thing on this, what do you feel? Is medical science capable of keeping a fetus alive at 6 weeks outside of the womb?
No. Period. End. No. We don't have artificial uteruses. We don't have. No. It is. Are we living on Mars? No, we're not living on Mars. Could we someday? Maybe, I guess, possibly, but no, it is not a thing. lung tissue, lungs, those organs that we as mammals need to intake oxygen and exchange for carbon dioxide and breathe that out and take the oxygen in because our tissues need it to live. Those aren't even present before 24 weeks. They're not even developed. They are not in existence prior to that time. So prior to 24 weeks, there's no lungs to do that very vital life thing of breathing. So it is not possible.
There's
and
also, go ahead.
I just wanted to really address really quick the question from before. I'll do it briefly.
Sure.
First, I appreciate all of the men here who are supportive, and we need you. I don't believe in no uterus, no opinion. I do believe in you're not the one pregnant, you're not the one deciding. That, I think, is sort of the mantra we should be thinking about. Also, when talking to people in Georgia and Alabama who just flat outright disagree with the science, disagree with facts, disagree with all of the things that we're trying to say, it's first really important to get on the same page. Are we talking about philosophy? Are we talking about religion? Or are we talking about facts? So we have to get on the same playing field, because if we're not on the same playing field, on the same conversation field, we're going to be talking at each other like it's not going to work. So if we can agree on a platform, are we going to discuss science? Okay. If we're going to discuss religion, well, that gets tricky because everybody's religion is individualized. And I am protected by, and I think, right, the First Amendment to not be oppressed by someone else's religion, right? So you have the freedom to practice your religion on yourself, but you don't have the freedom to practice your religion on other people.
Right.
So just wanted to address that from earlier. But yes, so the science is not there to support embryo transfers at this time.
Somebody from the chat mentioned about the ectopic pregnancy comment that was made by a politician, that it can be moved from like the fallopian tube and implanted in the uterus. What are your thoughts on that?
If I could do that, do you know how rich I would be? Do you know how rich I would be if that were actually a thing? Because people would flock to me and I would be the savior because I saved their pregnancy and they didn't have to lose a tube and they didn't have to get chemotherapy. Like, that would be amazing. However, something tells me this politician was not licensed in medicine. Yeah. So no, it's not a thing. And they should stop saying things they're not things. Like, I don't walk into a courtroom and start saying, I object. Like that, I don't do that because I'm not licensed to practice law. There's a reason. Oh, yes.
I'd hate to interject, but was this the same politician who said that you could rub some essential oils on it and it would just migrate to where it was supposed to be?
I mean, it could. I get them all confused, to be honest.
They all look the same after a while, don't they? They kind of do all look the same.
I mean, for Pete's sake, and don't even get me started about the sexual assault badness. It's just horrible. And I think all of the politicians, all of the legislators out there making these decisions need to first understand what consent is, and then we can talk about the science and intricacies of pregnancy and birth.
Well, Dr. Torres, one of the conversations I had yesterday with a gentleman who agreed with a lot of the politicians, like, it has a heartbeat, it has a mind, therefore it's human. And it's like, okay, fine. We can talk about a blastocyte as being a part of the human life cycle. I absolutely agree. But what we don't agree with is that this blastocyte is the same thing as a child. And it's not. Like, I don't want to try to desensitize people into thinking that, well, if we just label something, then slaughtering humans wholesale is the acceptable thing. No one's making that argument. I think the argument is that if you want to take control of your reproductive rights, and a part of that being that this single cell, or even if it's at the embryo stage, I don't want to take this to term. Here is the science behind what it is at this stage, if that's part of the argument. But what we can't do is start putting in extraneous factors. And what I mean by extraneous factors is one that you mentioned, by someone's religion. The gentleman that I was having a conversation with, along with many others, mentioned that, well, what you guys aren't accounting for is the soul. And I said, where? Okay, cool. Is that formed in the ectoderm? Is that formed in the mesoderm? Maybe you know, Dr. Torres, because I'm not familiar where that forms in what particular layer.
Well, if you ask Twitter, many people would say I don't even have a soul, so I'm not sure how to answer that question. And
I understand that too.
Yeah, I mean, here's another thing that we're not taking into consideration. I don't get to tell someone what their pregnancy is to them. I don't get to say, this is an embryo at 6 weeks, and this means that the trilaminar layers have done this, da, 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 da. If that embryo at 6 weeks already has a full scholarship to Harvard and is getting married on the Hawaiian island and the da, 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 like, who am I to say that they're wrong about that embryo? So people have their own ideologies and philosophies about their pregnancy, and that's great and that's fine. No one else gets to tell them what their pregnancy is, including politicians, including legislators, including judges, including the Supreme Court justices. So I think we need to be sensitive to the fact that everybody experiences their own pregnancy different. A miscarriage for someone can be an immense loss. A miscarriage for someone else can be a huge relief. And we can't cookie cutter pregnancies. But what we can do is say, oh, you individual are the one facing the risks of continuing the pregnancy and giving birth. There are always risks. There are risks of having an abortion. There are risks of giving birth. These are all of the risks. You'll have to make your decision. Only the pregnant person can do that. Their partner can't do that. Their doctor can't do that. I can't tell someone that they must have a child or that they should not have a child. I can say, I think your pregnancy is really risky. I think you need to consider these odds of it killing you and make your decision about a termination possibly, but I don't get to tell them what to do. Yeah. That's not for anybody to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. I mean, as we mentioned before when we were discussing the religious aspect, a lot of different faiths believe life starts at different points. I think it's in one of the India-based faiths is that life doesn't begin until the infant takes their first breath. That's when they're breathing in their soul. That I need to double check my sources on that, but I had heard that at one point in time. But the point is that's all different perspectives. And so you can't just say this is the only perspective here, because that's extremely un-American, because we have lots of different faiths here, and that's kind of the point of the country. So we have a new face in here with Divine Disbelief. So she's here. Yay. So hi. Please tell us about yourself really quickly. You showed up.
So
everything associated,
all the things,
all the things,
etc. So my name is Susan. I have been involved with reproductive justice for probably about 8 years since I've done the National Network of Abortion Funds Bowl-a-thon every year since 2012. Didn't get to do it this year because I had medical bills of my own. I am a former Planned Parenthood employee. I actually worked for Planned Parenthood of Greater Texas for a little over a year. It was just an admin, but I still got a chance to work with with community affairs and education and stuff like that to be involved in the community and stuff like that. So that was a lot of fun, and I really, really enjoyed that. Nathaniel said he's a former assistant state director. I am a current assistant state director for American Atheists. I am also treasurer for the Texas Democratic Secular Caucus and the co-host of Divine Disbelief.
I know that show.
Yeah.
I'm excited to have you guys here. So you mentioned you worked at Planned Parenthood. I was reading, again, all of my stats are coming from the guttmacherinstitute.org. Check it out. They are very thorough in their stuff, cite all of their sources. One thing that I saw that was pretty interesting is that every abortion clinic on average has about 20 protests a year. What was it like working where you're at in regard to that type of thing? Are there a lot of violence? There are violent acts, or there's a statistic for that. I can pull that up here in a minute. But what is the response that you get for your particular place where you were working?
Well, luckily with our offices, we had the actual clinic. They specifically call them health centers in Planned Parenthood. And they actually performed surgical abortions in that same building that the admin offices are in. But after the whole mess with, everybody performing surgical abortions has to be an ambulatory surgical center and have admitting privileges and blah, 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 they ended up doing a whole new ASC in South Dallas. They also have an ambulatory surgical center in Fort Worth, in Waco, and in Austin as well. And I was living in Fort Worth and working at the admin offices in Dallas. And I was like, I need to get my healthy woman checkup. So I'm just going to go to the Planned Parenthood that's close to me. And it was, I walk in and everyone's all like, oh, hi, I know you.
Yeah. Well, that's not to say we have not been immune to protest, though. We had that experience, January, where we went to the Shout Your Abortion.
Yeah.
And they were outside.
Yeah.
Just because people were talking about abortions, and we were at that, and then that person that stalked me.
Yeah.
Me in particular, I don't is a person that goes every single day to the clinic in Fort Worth.
Yeah, to Whole Women's in Fort Worth.
And he called me inside of the building where they were protesting, where we were having the event, called me. And we were terrified.
Yeah.
Because this person got my information.
Yeah.
And was trying to and we didn't know who he was. And it was, so we're not, it's I think a bit different for us because you were an admin, but the fact that somebody was like that to us.
But continuing my story.
Sorry.
Totally just jumped all over.
Yeah, sorry.
They, since in Fort Worth, they have the ambulatory surgical center in the same facility as, the family planning center. They still have to have, the double doors, double entrance. They have to buzz people in. They have to have a security guard there all the time. And, it's infuriating that we have to deal with this. And there's a health center in Plano too that does not perform abortions that gets protesters outside of it all the time. And I'm like, wait, so you just want to make sure that women can't get the health care that they need? They can't get their pap smears and, and people can't get gender affirming hormone therapy.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of people understand that Planned Parenthood, it was 3% of what they do is actually abortion, and the other 97% is basic healthcare stuff for not just women, but also for men. STI, STD checks. I don't know if they do prostate screenings there. I know they do, cervical cancer screenings and breast cancer screenings and stuff like that. I don't know if they branched into prostate yet.
I don't believe so, because somebody had asked me if they perform vasectomies, and I was like, I'm about 95% sure that they don't.
Yeah. That would be a good thing to start ushering in now, particularly if they're not allowed to do abortions anymore. Snip, snip, man. Let's stop the root of the cause.
I agree.
And have family planning in some shape, form, or fashion, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. But they, I don't know that those individuals really even take a moment to think that it's anything other than somebody going to have an abortion.
Right.
And they don't, and we have tried to educate sometimes, but it's like they don't want to listen sometimes either.
Yeah. There was so I'm originally from Corpus Christi, and in 2014, after the clinic down there closed, the 40 Days for Life organization decided to hold a protest outside of a closed clinic. So it was me and a bunch of my friends, and I was, a very, very active member of the atheist group down in Corpus. We had our own little counter protest, and we all wore our orange shirts, because it was the whole, orange, wear the orange, because that's what everybody was wearing whenever Wendy Davis did her filibuster and everything. Mm-hmm. And, we wore our orange, and we got out there, and I carried a sign that said, "Ask me about my abortion." And there was a woman who, she was obviously there with the 40 Days for Life, but we got to talking, and eventually it's sort of, there's this concept of like street epistemology of trying to break down people's arguments and stuff like that and break it down to its barest form. And that's sort of what we ended up doing. And she eventually was like, "Oh, I think I maybe see your point." Mm-hmm. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. And it
was a victory.
It's amazing when you see that.
Yeah, yeah.
But they finally starts to humanize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think the running stat is 1 in 4 women under the age of 45 will have an abortion. Mm-hmm. So it's a very common thing. It's something that it should be commonly spoken about, common dialogue, that sort of thing. We just don't. We talk about it like it's just this horrible, shameful thing, and I think a lot of that is also kind of the stigma where women aren't allowed to have sex, we're not allowed to do the deed, it's like without getting shamed for doing that. So it's just
I think a lot of it boils down to the control over women and the control over their sexuality and making sure that if we dare to, actually participate in what is a natural biological urge, that we are quote unquote punished for it.
Right.
Which is like,
well,
what if you're
we are the keeper of the wombs,
saying that children are a punishment? Like, I don't.
We're the keeper of the magical womb that people seem to not understand how it works, and that therefore we have to keep it sacred and super, like, we have to treat it as this magical thing that nobody understands. Like, it doesn't work that way. So many of the stigma associated with that. But I suppose that's another talk. Well, I had people asking if they wanted to ask Dr. Torres any questions, and then I was going to see if she had any questions to ask anybody. Do you happen to have one for Dr. Torres? I know you just kind of jumped on here a bit.
I don't have any questions. I follow Dr. Torres on Twitter, and you're one of my favorite people to follow. So
Aw, thanks.
I follow a lot of abortion providers, and it's one of those, like, I love all of them so much.
Well, thank you for being in the line of it and being down there and telling your story and taking on the harassment. I know what it's like to be harassed and have your information and be called, and you're like, I don't feel safe. It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you guys kind of hanging in there and doing the work that you do. It's really important.
Yeah.
She was very excited when I said we were coming.
I
said that I asked her, I said, "Hey, what are you doing on Thursday?" After I had already kind of committed to this, knowing that she probably wouldn't say no. And I was like, "Oh, we're going on, ScientistMel's channel and everything." And then she was,
It was the next morning when I was looking at the tweet.
She said, "Oh,
you didn't tell me Dr. Torres is going to be on."
Oh my God, you guys are going to make me blush.
Sorry, Mel. It's, I'm happy to be here with you, Mel, and with Nate. I'm pretty certain that my Susan is here specifically to talk to Dr. Torres.
Don't judge me.
No judgment.
I follow like Dr. Gunter and Dr. Morietti and stuff too. So
yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
We're all in this together. I mean,
the more people talking about it, the louder we get,
That's right.
That's kind of what it is. Well, Dr. Torres, did you have any questions? Because I had people asking you questions, and I didn't know if there was anything that you had questions about. I know I got Nate here who's discussing the law. That might be something. I don't know.
Yeah, I actually did. I wanted to ask Nate, and I think I may have missed the crux of it when I went off to answer a phone call. Because I get asked a lot, why is Roe v. Wade in jeopardy and why? So my question, though, because I think I understand why, my question is, how do we solidify the right to bodily autonomy? Go.
You have to amend the Constitution, unfortunately, at that particular time. That's really what it takes. What right now, the constitutionally protected right of a woman to enter a pregnancy to a pre-viable fetus, that right is not written anywhere in the Constitution. That right is something that was interpreted by the Supreme Court, saying, even though the Constitution doesn't say those particular words, for a woman to be equal under the law, she must have this right. She must be able to exercise this right. So that's how they've discovered it. But just like that Supreme Court found it to be a right, another Supreme Court can say, well, listen, this is not really a right. They got it wrong. And it happens. For instance, when for Dred Scott, it was the right of a white man to own slaves. They passed the 13th Amendment to overrule that right. And there's been even other rights that, for instance, at one time, affirmative action, where you can give benefits to people just for being black because of slavery, at one point in time, that was okay. Then the Supreme Court overturned that in I think in 2 years. They said, well, no, you can't do that anymore. So the crux of Roe v. Wade, that crux of that constitutional right, for it to be endowed where you don't have to have this problem every couple of years when the court turns, is to actually place it in the Constitution as an amendment. And I think they were trying to pass it with the I forgot which amendment. It was like a recent amendment. I wasn't sure if it was the
Equal Rights Amendment.
The Equal Rights Amendment. So something, and then something like Roe would have been enshrined within the Constitution, so no Supreme Court could overturn it.
Yeah, I was afraid you'd say that. But I mean, we need to have the Equal Rights Amendment because basically what the Equal Rights Amendment says is exactly what you just described, and that women are equal under the law in the Constitution. That's it. That's just recognizing women as equal members of society, as equal citizens with the same rights under the Constitution. That's all it is.
Yes, and it's a shame that we have to have that, but let's not forget, in the Constitution itself, that's what gives a woman the right to vote. If that right wasn't there, enshrined in the Constitution, women wouldn't have the legal right to vote. Some court would have I think it's at a point, some court would have determined, yes, women obviously have the right to vote. But they found it to be so important, they actually enshrined it in the Constitution. And I also want to make it very clear, the balance of power, even though it seems to be swinging more toward feminism, it's not there yet. We all know it, and we all know that this is something that we're still dealing with to this day. The difference how we treat each other based on gender, based on race, and this is just one of those things that I think when you're in the Deep South, it's still that misogynistic Bible Belt. We're going to do it this way. We're going to force everybody to do it this way. But I would ask you, what about their argument? Their argument is not that their argument is that we believe abortion is wrong. And here in our little part of the world, we want to make the laws that drive our future, based on the Constitution. We disagree with Roe v. Wade because the court read that in. That's not in there. They made that up. We want to do what we want to do in Alabama. If you want to do that in New York, you do it in New York. But we just don't want to do it in Alabama. Why force us to do something we don't want to do? We're saying you can do it, but we just don't want to do it here.
What do you think? Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Torres.
No, and I think that the counter, argument to that is obviously you can see where they're coming from, but then the answer is, but you're forcing me to do something, is, the other side of that coin, naturally. And so I think that that's where the argument can be made. It needs to be accessible to those who want that, and to those who don't, that's fine. But yeah, I see what you're saying.
It's a pain. It's just a pain. I have a question for you real quick, Nate. There's a lot of, I believe they're trying to incriminate people for getting abortions, even leaving the state and going to get an abortion outside of the state if their home state is, I can't remember if it's Alabama or Georgia. After a while, it just all blends together, with the awfulness. What are your thoughts on that, Nate? And especially if there's, doctors in another state, if they're involved, they're considered an accessory. How can they actually enforce that?
No, because you generally can't. The law deals with a thing called jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is if you commit a crime within that jurisdiction, the people in that jurisdiction can prosecute you for it. But you can't then commit a crime. Let's say if I'm in New York and I commit a crime in New Jersey, New York can't prosecute me, only New Jersey, because it happened in New Jersey under New Jersey law. So what happens is that there's actually a famous case from New Jersey that I think maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, where there was a high school teacher. And they went on a field trip to Germany where the age of consent is like 16. And these high school students were 17 from New Jersey. And the teachers had sex with the students. And under New Jersey law, it would have been considered statutory rape. But in Germany, it wasn't. So they couldn't be prosecuted for doing what they did, even though everything was consensual. Under New Jersey law, because Jersey tried to prosecute them, tried to say, no, they committed statutory rape with our students just in Germany. They said, well, listen, if that was legal under Germany law, then you have no case. Mm-hmm. Sorry, my kid is bothering me over here. He makes like banging on the door, like she's dying to come in. Now I lost my train of thought because she kept banging on the door.
It's okay.
So I forget.
You were talking about jurisdiction and how
there's no jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah. For the law. Yeah. So there's no jurisdiction. So they want to. So even if you perform this abortion at another state, then it's not like Georgia can then prosecute you for something you did in another state, especially if it's legal in that other state. So that wouldn't be the case. But the law is fundamentally illegal now. I mean, unconstitutional. Pardon me. That law is fundamentally unconstitutional now because it contradicts what the Supreme Court has already said. I believe the law probably will not go into effect. What's probably going to happen is that Planned Parenthood or one of these organizations is going to go right to court and ask for an injunction. Please enjoin them from enforcing this law because it conflicts with Supreme Court precedent. Boom.
I know the ACLU is active about it right now. They've already started, so the ACLU has gotten involved. And they're suing, so.
Yeah, more than likely they're not going to close any clinics. Like, this is just a show. What they attempt to do is go to the Supreme Court and have them overrule Roe. But that's going to take years because after it's dismissed, most of those cases won't even make it up to even be thought of by the Supreme Court because they'll be so easy to dismiss. You banned all abortions. We can't even hear that case is meritless. You can't put that law into place. So even though these laws have been passed, they really have no teeth because their sole purpose is to give the Supreme Court, multiple chances to take up one of those cases and overturn the fundamental principle of Roe. And if they do that, then unfortunately we're back to 1973.
So the good news is it's going to take long enough to at least make it through another election in order to remove people that are currently in this position, right?
Yes, this is going to take. This is definitely going to be long enough. And then let's not forget, for Roe versus Wade, that case started in 1969. It wasn't decided until 1973, 4 years later. And actually, that case, one of the other principles in that case that at least talked about, but actually is taught in most Civ Pro classes if you're in law school, is the court of mootness. Because Texas, as scumbaggers as they were, the plaintiff in Roe v. Wade, she had her baby. So Texas went into court and was like, yo, she had her baby. We don't have it. There's no argument here. She wanted the fundamental right to an abortion. Texas was like, well, she's already had the baby. There's no case in controversy here. Dismiss the case. She doesn't want to have an abortion. But what happens is the Supreme Court said, no. If that was the case, then no woman could ever find reprieve and troll because pregnancy is only 7 months and it takes like years for us to hear the case. So nobody would ever come to the Supreme Court. So in that case, they ruled that you can't just say because she's had the baby, the case is now moot. So it's interesting how the case is known for a lot of other principles that this plaintiff had to overcome so the Supreme Court could actually make the argument and say, yes, I have the constitutional right to end my pregnancy if I choose to. And they agreed with it.
Well, I think Alabama very specifically already said they know that what they have passed is unconstitutional. They know, or it won't stand in court. They know that, and so does Ohio, so does Georgia, and the thing with somebody, and I saw it in a comment, Mel, as well, and so that way it doesn't get asked again. By I asked about that person, because Susan and I were talking about that, the person that he was asked about the petri dishes and stuff, right? And he said, well, it's not inside of a woman, so it's not, you're not pregnant, and that they
so
know.
fertilized eggs,
the frozen fertilized,
the fertilized eggs, essentially, like for people who have difficulties trying to conceive, they go and try the in vitro fertilization. So those don't count for some reason.
Well, because it's not. Well,
it's not in a person.
Exactly, it's not inside of a woman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the key
You gotta
thing.
be careful of your terms. Can I just say also, I wanted to just tag off of what Nate said. These are also not enforceable because it requires a significant violation of HIPAA, the Health Information Privacy and Protection Act. No law enforcement can go into medical records without a warrant and say, oh, you had an abortion, so now I'm going to arrest you. Oh, you performed an abortion, so now I'm going to arrest you. Like, that's not enforceable, and it requires a violation of HIPAA in order to enforce. The other thing is, regarding these heartbeat bills, let's just stop a second. If we're going to say that life and whatever philosophical, that's a whole nother thing, right? Like, life is philosophical. If life is going to begin with a heartbeat, well, death ends without a heartbeat, or like that's what death is no heartbeat. So therefore, all the medicine that we have as far as looking at brain scans and EEGs and brain death versus coma, well, we don't need to do CPR anymore. So, because if there's no heartbeat, then that's just dead. So we don't need to do that. I mean, it is, these laws violate science, violate what is already understood as far as medical protocols in so many ways. And there are no two ways around it. If a heartbeat equals life, then we need to stop doing CPR, because no heartbeat equals death. Like that, and that's ridiculous. Yeah. So they know what they're doing.
Yeah, and they're using, what I find interesting, they're doing the whole heartbeat thing. That's associated with love, it's associated with all these warm feelings that we get. Well, if the heart's beating, then that means it's alive, because I can hear a heart beating on my dog. I can hear it on, they use this terminology specifically to try to put this air of guilt around it. And I know, I believe I saw an article about the Satanic Temple is suing because one of their members had to take home this literature, and they're like, you need to listen to the heartbeat of your baby, and if you still want to have an abortion. So there's a whole lawsuit by the Satanic Church, and it looks like it's gonna go through in court because, so if you haven't Googled that, that's a fun read. So check that out. And I'll be curious on your thoughts, Nate, on that particular case. If you hadn't checked that out, you please read that. Let me know I always enjoy your words when you chime in on the legal stuff, because I am no lawyer. Words are hard. But Nate, I'm glad he's here. So we're coming up, I guess we can probably end in about 20 minutes, because that's like an hour and a half. This has been an amazing discussion. I've really enjoyed this so far. So, Dragnot, he is not in his seat. So let me go down the line. Nate, just out of curiosity, have you heard about the Satanic lawsuit yet?
No, I'm gonna be hitting the Google machine like right after this. Check it out. Check it out now.
Let me know what you think when you do, because I'm curious. Because it's beforehand they didn't think it would hold much weight at all, but because of the legal terminology, or the terminology that was used by the defendant that came out, it actually pushed it to where it is discussed in court. So I'm really curious on how that actually happened, because they were going to just throw it out, but apparently the defendants, messed up and said words. So that brought it out to where it can be put into court. It might actually be a viable case to where the Satanic Temple will win this lawsuit against this whole idea that women have to listen to a heartbeat of the baby and then take literature home that's pro-life, and it's very preachy and Christian-like, and like, well, I'm a member of the Satanic Church and this violates my right to practice my religion when you're preaching at me. And so it's like that whole route. And so the defendants have messed up by
do they make them take, they actually make them take literature home?
Yes.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And is this place a government facility or not?
I believe so, yes.
Oh, all right, because that seems like they have a case there, at least a First Amendment case, because the government can't force you to to read stuff and to you have.
It's like a
that
48-hour thing. So she traveled out of town, and she had to pay for a hotel. She had to pay for a car and all this stuff. So she was at expense trying to get this abortion, and they made her wait a couple extra days over preaching at her. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so let me know what you think on that. So any last thoughts as we go down the panel here? Any last thoughts on this whole abortion ban?
Can I ask the panel one thing?
Sure, absolutely, go for it.
How do you guys feel about the fact that all these laws are targeting the doctors? None of them are targeting the women. So I think that's a plus. But the scheme is that, like for instance, in Alabama, the doctor who performs an abortion, let's say you had a 12-year-old who happened to be raped by her father or something like that, the worst possible situation, and you wanted to give that young girl an abortion. The doctor who gives her the abortion can get more time than the rapist's father. He can get up to 99 years. The rapist's father can get maybe 25 years. That sounds insane to me. Like, even if you're going to write a law that you know is BS, why would you write it in such a way where the person who seemingly is trying to help the 12-year-old is going to get more time in prison, substantially more time, than the rapist themselves?
Anybody want to weigh in on that?
I mean, the way that I look at it is that you can always have somebody who is dissuaded from having an abortion and carrying the child to term, but if you have the person performing the abortion being dissuaded, well, you look at it, it's a 1 to 10 and 10 to 1 kind of scenario, right? You only have a small pool of providers versus a large pool of people getting the procedure. So if you can target them, that's more efficacious towards stopping it altogether.
Yeah. So target the doctors means you're going to stop it more likely.
Essentially.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in? Divine Disbelief, we'll hit you and then we'll hit up Dr. Torres. What do you think? What do you think about all this?
In general?
Well, Nate had the
overall,
question about targeting the doctors, Yeah, I mean, if you have other thoughts, throw those in too. Throw them in the hat.
It's like I and others have said, a lot of it's about the control of women and women's sexuality and women's bodies, because there's still the idea that women are, as much as nobody wants to admit it, there's still the idea that women are property, our own. That's why we give away a woman in, during her wedding, from her father to her new husband.
And those promise rings and
God,
that's
and
so
purity
creepy.
balls. Don't
that's
get me
so
started
creepy.
on that.
I did want to eat later today, but thank you.
Thanks, folks.
You said balls.
Yeah. Sounds so dirty to be something so pure, apparently.
I mean,
purity balls.
I was going to say I'm not going to judge, but we all know I'm going to judge.
Yeah.
See, now this should be on a T-shirt with something very profane, purity balls, and have it be like 60-year-old version hanging down low.
Oh, goodness.
I'd pay money for that.
Oh, God.
I would not. It is, this is in a way, it's still targeting women.
Oh, yeah.
they're trying to make it so that it's like deflected around a doctor, but they're making it so doctors don't want to. And by looking at fines or saying you can get, and again, things that are currently unenforceable, but they're just trying. And we went over this we were on the channel, Services channel a couple weeks ago, where it's like, take anything you can, try everything you can, throw everything at the wall. Who cares how shitty the painting is? Something is going to stick.
Right.
And they're picking up the pieces that they're going to try and take to Supreme Court.
Yeah, because it's like a lot of these bills are just, amalgamations of, the stuff that sort of worked in other states, and they're leaving out the stuff that didn't work in other states, and it's just a matter of...
At this point, everybody's just going to say, okay, now what didn't work in Alabama? Because that's the one that's... right, because how much lower can Alabama possibly go?
Don't ask that question.
They will try.
Oh,
that's
my
the
goodness.
thing.
Mandatory incest.
Oh, God.
Oof.
Oh, I'm going to have
that was pretty
nightmares
rough.
tonight.
Child marriages and Alabama is the most.
That's still a thing. Child marriage is still a thing.
It's still a thing.
America.
And they're the most misogynist state in the union, and that is seconded by Utah. So know that.
Yeah.
But I
And
think
fun legal fact, in New York, you can still get married to a 14-year-old.
Wow.
Rhode Island too, I think, right?
That's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rhode Island, I think, as long as you had the permission. I don't want to misquote Rhode Island, but I'm pretty certain. It's a tiny
entire
state. 4 people
state
live in
of
a
Rhode
4-mile radius place.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to get somebody's going to come to me. Where as long as they have like parental consent. Yeah.
Huh.
Like a 14-year-old can get married to a 35-year-old.
Oh, my
It is.
gosh.
Yeah, it was, I'll say this, it was maybe up to 2 years ago, because I haven't looked at it recently, but up to 2 years ago, in New York, you could marry a 14-year-old legally if you had the parents' permission and judicial consent. And it happened, but one thing they found when they looked at the numbers, it was only females who were getting married at that age. And it was like only one male child they had got married at that age in like the past 50 years. All of them had actually been young girls at the age of 14.
Wow.
Yep. Well, that's the property thing again, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely not pedophilia. Definitely not pedophilia.
no.
It's and I think what NA said, it's disgusting. I think that's the best way.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that we're having this
Yeah.
conversation in 2019 is disgusting.
Oh,
Right.
God.
Like, where are we at? Of course, we also, in my opinion, elected the wrong person a couple of years ago and have done so since then as well.
It's just been a
But-
dumpster fire. It really has.
But the fact that we keep saying this, we're so far forward and progressive and stuff like that, and yet we're still having
No.
these are the conversations that we
Yeah.
and then, yet we're still having this conversation.
Right.
I would
Yeah.
much rather be sitting here right now wondering, like, Nebraska and Iowa are playing baseball tonight, and I'm wondering how I'm going to be able to watch that. But instead, I by my own moral standard, am going to be looking at this kind of stuff and seeing what we can continue to do moving forward with this.
Yeah.
And I'm honestly upset that I have to miss Nebraska baseball because these pieces of garbage are still doing this in 2019.
Yep.
You're making me miss baseball.
Don't do that.
God. I have a pillow that I call the void, and I scream into it often. So-
That
I
works.
need one of those.
It works.
I was gonna make a joke about you, but
Please don't.
yeah. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, Dr. Torres, we're up to you now. What are your...
Hey, little man.
Oh, cool.
So I just wanted to say, yeah, I think Dragnot hit the nail on the head. It's a biggest bang for your buck. You've got limited resources as far as providers, so hit them, because then everybody's going to be screwed if they're not practicing. I think you also make a very important point, Divine Disbelief, in that it does target women. And it does not. What was the point that you made? I forgot now. It is about punishing. It's all about property. It's about not viewing women as actual human beings. We are second-class citizens, and the whole thing about attacking doctors is we have our medical license, and once we're arrested, we probably lose it. Like, our livelihood is gone.
Yeah.
So that is a huge intimidation factor. So of course we're going to be intimidated. However, I always think about Savita and how those doctors in Ireland were forced with, do I get arrested or do I save her life? And I like to think in my mind that I would save her life and risk being arrested, because it's just what you do. Now, I don't know the circumstances. I'm sure that they needed an OR team, and the OR team was like, we're not getting arrested. Like there are a lot of different limitations and different things that can happen in that scenario, which apparently we're going to find out how that works very shortly. But I think that all of this is to say very good intimidating, tactics, and the fact that we are not common and we can lose our entire ability to practice medicine. It's a thing, and it's hard.
It is hard. I think, on my personal thoughts on all of this, just as an aside, when I was really young, I was pro-life. When I was like much younger, as a teenager, and my mom's like, if you ever got pregnant, we get an abortion. I'm like, no, that's just wrong. I'd want to have the baby, but that whole youth mentality, I had been modeled a lot by and molded by the people I was around. Like, I was going to church a lot and these other people, and there was a stigma associated with it. I was told that baby fetuses were used in makeup and all kinds of just asinine things. And when I started to question, and I dug down deep, and I became educated. And when I became educated and I learned what was going on and what the truth is, I'm like, okay, wait, Maybelline doesn't use baby fetuses in its makeup, and they don't use these things over here. It's just, you're told so many things, like when you're young, that
Planned Parenthood doesn't sell baby parts.
Yeah, they don't sell baby parts, but you're told a lot of these things when you're young, and it's with the same fervor as, if you touch this stove, it's hot. You've got to understand how dire it is, and they treat it like it's the same type of level of danger as like running through a fire, or playing with matches, or sticking something in the electrical socket. It is nowhere near the same, but it's treated with that same fervor and fear around that, to where it gets ingrained in you really young, and that echoes into your adulthood, and it takes a lot to undo that. So here we have all these people. The governor of Alabama, she can't even have kids. And she signed the thing. She can't even have children, but she's making this decision for all of these other women. But it's just, we have an uphill battle, because we have people that have it ingrained in them that this is horribly evil and wrong, and it's horrible for these reasons, and it was taught to them with that same, when you're young. And that's the point. We need to be talking to the young people and working towards undoing a lot of that, because when I got older, I learned a lot more. I'm like, okay, I'm educated now, I understand this is what this is, and it's almost needs to be brought with the same fervors. Do you understand how many people will die because of this? Have you any idea? So I almost feel like we have to kind of counter it with, this is dire, this is scary, this is awful. Do you not understand what this means? Let me, but it's just, having been a person who's taught evolution in the Bible Belt to a bunch of farm kids who thought the devil planted the fossils and that's why it's wrong. There's a way to do it, and it's extremely difficult, because you have to circumvent all of that to get to, okay, look, this is what the evidence is. And that's what I try to do here. Doesn't always work, but I try.
We applaud your efforts.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Actually, my first undergrad was technically pre-med, so, I applaud doctors because I don't want to touch people. So, I'm like, I'm more of a microscope person. I got myself a publication on a breast cancer test that I helped engineer, so that was my path. Awesome. And now I'm trying to do more science education because we're getting dumber. So, we have the NSF data, the latest data to show us that. So hopefully we need more critical thinking. Everybody's welcome here to talk and engage, and I'm happy to educate anyone, give them what I know, what we can do. So, gosh, here we are. Hour and a half, guys. That was like almost 30. That was like 30 minutes longer than I thought, but that's amazing. I'm so glad you were here, Dr. Torres. Thank you. Thank you, Divine Disbelief. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Dragnot. Any last thoughts? We got 5 minutes, and then we'll cut y'all off because, you know, this will be like, got to cut you off the bar here. We're all drowning in this wonderful intelligence. So
I have a quick question, and I think that Nate might be able to answer it.
Okay.
Better than any. Well, I just before like a sign off thing, because it has to do with those crisis pregnancy centers.
Okay.
Nate, do we have any shot of getting rid of those things? Like just at all?
Those are the fake. From what I'm understanding, are those the ones that are fake, where they look like abortion centers, and when we go inside there, then they try to like convincing them not to go?
Yeah.
More often than not, they buy Google ads, and so if you search abortion in a specific area, the crisis pregnancy centers will show up at the top because they buy advertisements, like advertising space.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's a case out of California where they tried to shut those things down, but the California court, well, the Supreme Court actually ruled that it was a freedom of speech issue. That if they had the clinic, they couldn't deceive people, but they had the right to do that. If they invite someone in, they come in, and they can give them a speech. You couldn't stop them from doing it. So it came out to be a free speech issue. So I'm not sure unless you could show there's some type of deception, because they can't advertise one thing and then be doing something else. But usually these things are worded very carefully. Let's come in for a consultation. And, just because, you assume the consultation was about being, to help you get an abortion. No, this was something else, You should have read it more carefully. So
that's kind of what I figured you would say, but, glimmers of hope.
There's always Gandalf. There was always hope, or there was never hope. I don't remember. I would like to think that there is hope. I can't remember what Gandalf said.
Of Dumbledore. Oh, was I?
Sorry.
I was thinking of Dumbledore. Like
Was
in
it
the,
Dumbledore? They look the same.
Well, like Dumbledore has that one that's like, even in the darkest of situations, you can like.
Yes.
You
can always remember to turn on the light. Yeah, Gandalf and Dumbledore are not that different.
Really
I only knew they. What is it?
To all the nerds out there, they don't mean it. They don't mean it. They don't know what they say.
Was it brightest day, darkest night, something?
Oh,
it's like Green Lantern.
I have a whole section on my piano that's just Lord of the Rings. It's
I'm
like
Star
my
Wars,
miniatures.
so
but I have miniatures behind me. I know you guys can't see it on like the Zoom chat, but on OBS, I had to use my camera for that, so I couldn't like split it in two. That's why you can't see me on Zoom. But yes, I have a lot of collectibles. I am that nerd, but I'm House Slytherin too, so I don't take that for
me
whatever
too.
it is.
oh my God.
Yeah, both of us.
Look,
I've got a bunch of Funko Pops behind me, so
you can claim that you're nerds. I've been playing City of Heroes this entire time.
I was wondering because I saw your screen. I saw the screen flashing, and I was like, "There's no way he's looking at Dr. Torres right now because my screen is not giving me epilepsy."
I was looking at her, but because I have City of Heroes here and I have you guys here, so I am looking at you.
It was funny. I was like, his skin just
tell.
keeps changing colors.
No, I just wonder, Drag, are you wearing pants?
Find out next time on this episode.
Right on.
Oh my goodness. All right, I guess we should sign off. Dr. Torres, any last thoughts on any of this or all of it? What are your last thoughts? This has been an amazing chat and discussion, by the way, and I'm very, very thankful to have you all here. So thank you for that.
Thanks for bringing us all together. You guys are amazing, and I love having been a part of this. I wish we could all go out for margaritas or something when I'm not on call. Last thoughts are, we are in an age of anti-intellectualism. This is predominant. Willful ignorance is it's like the baseline. It's like what to expect, which is so sad and so disheartening. So I plead with everyone out there to make a conscious effort to avoid things like I believe and I think or what do you believe, or what do you think? We really have to change the way we communicate in this time. Hopefully in the future we can go back to just being normal people, not having to use specific phrases. But I think we, see, I just did it. It is my contention that we ought to be using phrases like, do you accept or deny this fact? Because when you get into, I believe this, I believe this, I believe it's murder, I believe it's not murder, I believe I have a choice, like, you have to break it down into, do you accept or deny the fact that gravity exists? Do you accept or deny the fact that, yes, the Earth is a sphere? Spheroid, I was corrected by a NASA physicist. Do you accept or deny the fact that pregnancy changes a person's physiology and incurs risks to health and life? Do you accept or deny that fact? And so I think we will make some progress. I think there is hope. I think there's help for Hogwarts, anyone who asks it. I think that we need to make adjustments in how we approach these conversations in order to put facts and science forward and really hold them up higher than we have had to before.
Yeah, all very well said. I have to agree with that. We need to stop shifting from what my personal opinions are to what are the actual facts. Do you accept them or not? Yes or no? You know, maybe that's more of Nate's territory. This is a yes or no question for the witness. You know, I didn't ask for a narrative here. Yes or no? Pretty easy. I don't know. I think
yes, yes.
That's Nate's land. All right, so Nate, since you're up here, why don't you tell us your final thoughts, and then I'll hit the other two members of the panel. What are your final thoughts, sir?
I feel that this problem, it's all stemmed from one thing. It's just that we're just not treating women as equals. We still have this problem in the workplace. We still have this problem even in our culture about, giving women away, like someone was saying earlier, for marriages. We still hold on to these vestiges of the past, even though intellectually we fight against them and I think our deeds, but in our actions. And that's what these laws, I think, are coming from. There's still this hierarchical scheme that men can still tell women what to do. And on top of that, it always will be this fight until I think we start talking to each other and we start realizing and agreeing on what the facts are. Because the facts down there are totally different for them than they are up here for us. And I feel bad because I feel like I'm always preaching to the choir when I'm preaching to a group of people who kind of think the same way I do. But I will say, I've argued, because my mom, for instance, is very, very much, anti-abortion. And speaking to her, she is as convinced as it is that it is wrong. And even hearing the numbers and hearing the evidence and saying these are the facts, she still says to me, I believe it's wrong. And I think that's the hurdle that we have to overcome, because that is something that no matter how much we come to agreement, how do we get those people to see it that way? I think that's the true fight in the conversation.
That's fair. All right. Last thoughts, Divine Disbelief. What do you guys think?
I had to unmute us really quick.
Sorry.
What the whole thing boils down to, for me personally, is that we need to trust women. We need to trust those who can get pregnant, because it's not just a cis woman thing. We need to understand that we are capable of making decisions for ourselves, and everybody knows or loves, or both, someone who has had an abortion. That's a basic fact. One of those is me. So, but yeah, you can watch our show. we on our show try to keep it upbeat, but we still talk about news as it affects the secular community, and it's really difficult to stay upbeat when talking about people taking away women's bodily autonomy. But we have made the decision every single week to at least touch on it, because it is such an important issue, and we both see that. And it's ongoing. It's an ever developing thing, and you'd you'd hope it wouldn't be something that we had to tackle, on our 2 shows a week. But
yeah, every single episode so far.
Just throw in images of cats every once in a while. Like, okay, so now we talk really something awful. Here's a really, really cute video of a polar bear getting tickled. It's like,
is that a video? Does that exist?
Yeah, I know there's GIF images of that. So sometimes, like on my communicator account on Twitter, I'm like, okay, this is just really awful. In case you're having a bad day, here's a picture of a polar bear getting tickled. So,
cute emergency is always a good one.
Yes, those are wonderful. Throw those in there sometimes. That tends to help. So.
Yeah, but and my final thing is that look at Texas, look at Georgia, look at Ohio and Missouri, and these are all. Ohio more now than has been before. People would say that they're red states. We're not. And we were very close in 2016.
Yeah.
And we were really close in November. And the best chance we have to stop all of this stuff is to put the right people in office.
Yep.
Right.
And the people that respect women's bodily autonomy, people that will respect a woman's right to privacy.
Yep.
Fair enough. All right, Dragnot, any last thoughts?
Not too many. I've expended all of my wisdom for the night.
Okay. Well, you have to recharge for next time, I guess.
Yeah. I have stupid on my channel to review, so that's saved before. But I am glad to have had this talk again, and I will feel happy to appear on your channel. Anyone else's shirtless is a service that I have. But on a more serious note, I kind of like this all seemed, it didn't seem just completely contrived. I don't think it was a coincidence that all these states all of a sudden came out with this legislation, or trying to change the course of history. But with anything else, this too shall pass. So I don't think I'm too concerned given the playing field has changed quite a bit, and that with the advent of technology and with people having more and more conversations about these sorts of things, people can be disabused from terrible, terrible ideas. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you for introducing me to some more awesome people.
Well, I'm glad to have you here again. So for my last thoughts is the fact is we have an undereducated society, and we have people that are willfully ignorant, that often misuse and misrepresent science to push their own personal agendas. As Dr. Torres and Nate and everybody else here has said, we need to push more towards what are the facts of the matter, what is real and what is personal opinion. So hopefully we've dispelled some of these myths surrounding the abortion ban. We've talked heavily about the legalities of it, what the medical side of it is. We've talked about activism. We've talked about voting. Use your voice. People, just talk about it. Have conversations about it, and don't be ashamed about that. 1 in 4 women under the age of 45 have had an abortion. You know somebody. This is a common thing. It's not something that's strange or weird or bad or awful. It's no different than any other procedure. Every procedure has risks, and we need to stay educated and on top of it. So go out there, vote. Have conversations. There are people like Dr. Torres, Divine Disbelief. They're all on the internet, and they're happy to answer your questions. I am happy to answer your questions. Direct people to these sources that you feel are strong in knowledge. So, with that said, thank you, Dr. Torres, for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun. I really appreciate it.
This is amazing. I'm so glad you got to be on here and you weren't, I know you're on call, so thank you so much for your time. Divine Disbelief, thank you for being on here and talking about your experiences and your activism.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for having us very much.
Thank
That
you.
was awesome. Nate, you're like family now almost. You and Drag are on my show so regularly. You were on the glyphosate talk we had. I might have you on the talc stuff and the cancer. I might have you back on that, but I've learned a lot from you and the legalities of that. So thank you for being on the show, Nate.
Thanks for having me.
This is awesome. And thanks, Drag. As always, drag is drag. So
Yeah.
And I've learned a lot from Dr. Torres too. So this has been amazing. So I've put links to all of their websites in the description. I can add some more. So I'll go back through and make certain I have all good appropriate hyperlinks. So do check out their work. Do check out what they do. They're all amazing humans, and I'm glad that they took time out to be on my show. So good night, guys. I'm going to send squishy science hugs to you, and I'll be back here tomorrow night with Whiskey Cast on Spirited Science, where we're talking about how whiskey's made, the origins of it, the history of whiskey. So that'll be pretty interesting. The science behind whiskey. That whole particular series is based on having an adult beverage and talking science. And then Saturday morning, I guess I'm talking about inflationary universe. So I guess I better start studying up, huh? So thank you guys again for being here, and I will see you guys next time. So I'm going to show my patrons video because my patrons are awesome, and then we'll be signing out. So good night.